From Wine Intelligence, and this is our first seminar of the day. With lots of espresso inside me, hopefully we'll be able to run through it on time. We're talking today about the science of choice, and as researchers it's very important for us to understand how we as people and we as consumers choose, and how that is going to help us make decisions that we need to make in the wine category. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So to get us started and to get our brains in here, I don't know how many people were out corporate hospitality or entertaining clients, distributors or guests last night, but maybe our brains need waking up a little bit, particularly as we're talking about the science of the brain. So to do that, my colleagues are bringing round some chocolate. Partly it's to give you, I have to admit, a little bit of a sugar rush to start us off and to get everybody's energy levels going. And partly it's because we're going to be talking about how we choose. So there's two pieces of chocolate coming around for each of you, A and B. And you'll see on that little sheet you've got in front of you, can you just circle which one you prefer the taste of? So A and B. Two chocolates coming round. So this is to... Also, I'm trying to bribe you by giving you chocolate, because then hopefully you'll feel more positive about us and what we're doing today. So there are lots of reasons, always a good thing to start off a presentation with giving people chocolate. So has everybody got the chocolate yet? Table missing here? So taste those two chocolates. Now I'm expecting really good results from this, because clearly you're all tasting professionals working in the wine trade. So try those two chocolates. I'll leave you to it just for a minute.
This one's A and this one's B. I remember which one's A. And B. I remember which one's A.
Has everyone around you got chocolate? We're missing on this table here? Yep, okay. Natasha's coming. Quickly, A. And B. Try and remember which one this is. So you can make a decision. A, B, A. So is it working? Is the sugar working? Oh, if you're allergic, there's no orange in there. No oranges. Oh, we should have done that, shouldn't we? Nut allergy. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to point it out. Has everybody got chocolate? I didn't get some, but I'll come back for it later. Okay, maybe I need the sugar as well. I've had the espresso, so maybe that's going to do the same job. So hopefully that's waking up, or has helped to wake up one of your senses in terms of how we choose. We're going to come back to which one you chose in a moment. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. Now, I also want you to wake up your brains in terms of how we think by using a different part of your brain, which is your memory. So on this, you should be able to answer these, hopefully not too taxing. On your little sheets, write down which month you were born in. And then the second question, the city you were born in. And the third question, slightly more challenging when we tried this in our office, I have to admit, which was the last two digits of your mobile phone number. Now the only way I could do this was to actually go through my whole mobile phone number to get to the last two digits at the end. So write down the last two digits of your mobile phone number. Okay, so hopefully now we've woken up a different part of our brain, which is our memory. Different question for you, focusing on a different part of your brain. How much would you pay for a wireless keyboard? So say at home, you needed a wireless keyboard for some reason. You had one, it broke, you wanted a different one. Now can we do, I know that not everybody is used to pounds or is resident here, but if we wouldn't mind just doing this in pounds, so pounds and pence, how much would you be willing to pay for a wireless keyboard? Just write it down. What do you think you'd be willing to pay? Okay, you've got no idea, just put down a number. Any number you want. And then finally, to wake up the visual parts of your brain, there's two different types of olive oil there. The one on the left, here, we'll call that, have they got A and B on the sheet? I don't know, it has. So that's A, and this is B. You need a bottle of olive oil. Which one are you going to choose? A or B? Just write it down on your sheet. You'll see them, so it's quite slightly more difficult to see. Just based on what you can see there. So imagine you're in a supermarket or a shop and you need to buy some olive oil. Is it going to be A on the left or B on the right? Okay, so a few exercises to get different parts of our brains functioning. Just going to come back to the chocolate. I'm going to give you one more treat, I hope. Depending on which one you preferred, they're going to come round now again, and I'd like you to just write down, there's a little bit of space under A and B for the chocolate. Why? So think of it as a bit of a tasting note. Why did you prefer? So they've got A and B, so tell them which one you preferred. Take back a piece of the one you preferred and write down a couple of words to describe why you liked the taste of that one. So they've got the A's and B's there, so pick the one you liked and write down a few notes, like a couple of words about why you liked the flavour of the one that you did. Now this is, we're taxing you now, you have to coordinate the one you liked to make sure you get that one. So this is of course going to be very easy for a room full of wine trade professionals. They come up with superb tasting notes about why you like the chocolate that you did. We're nearly there, so most people got that table. Yeah, we have a second piece here. Yeah. Anybody else not had the extra chocolate treat? No, I think we're done. Everybody? Fabulous. So why did you prefer the taste of the one that you did? Okay. So what I've been doing so far, I've positioned to you as waking up your brains. Actually, we haven't just been waking up your brains, we've been playing some experiments and testing some experiments out on you so that you can see, so we can illustrate how our brains work. So the first, the chocolate exercise that we've done with you, yes, we did want to give you a bit of sugar and a little treat so that you feel positive about us, but actually we were being slightly underhand. When they brought round the second plate and you picked your A or B, we'd swap them. So some of you may have realised, some of you may not have realised. This is a replication of a very famous experiment that was done and has been repeated. Basically here what happens is the respondents are shown two photographs of similar looking people. So you can see that in A. The respondent picks the photograph of the person that they think is the most attractive. Then with sleight of hand, they're then shown the picture they rejected and asked to talk about why they preferred that person. Now this experiment has been repeated in many universities around the world and with many consumers around the world. Typically 70% of respondents don't realise that it's been switched, because it's hardwired into their brain that this is the choice I've made, therefore I'm going to justify my choice. So I don't know whether you, with the chocolate experiment, which is really building on this, did or realise it's the same thing, which is some of you may have, when you got the piece of chocolate back, started to justify, even if it maybe didn't quite taste like you remembered, you're starting to think about why did I like it. Your brain is starting to be hardwired and programmed into that's the decision I've made, so I'm going to justify that decision. This experiment has also been done actually with jam. where they had very, very different flavours of jam. I think it was blueberry and a raspberry, so very, very distinct flavours. And they had these sort of pots that you could turn over, and it's jam on either side in each pot. So the respondents taste the two jams, say which one they like, then offered back the pot, a bit like we did with you with the chocolate, and asked to explain why did they like it. And again, in that experiment, around 70, even higher in that 1% of respondents didn't know that it had been switched, and then went on to defend the decision that had been made, that they had already made. So what we're learning here is that our brains start to wire and program, and we start to believe and make justifications for the decisions that we've already made. Now, when it comes to the keyboard, there was a reason that we asked you those questions that might have seemed random at the beginning. And this is about priming. So this is another part of our brain that is acting in the subconscious. So look at the price, maybe look at the price of the people next to you that you put down for the wireless keyboard, and there's a reason we were asking you this. Again, another experiment has been done by Dan, who's who's a very famous researcher in this area. And what he did was got US consumers to write down the last 2 digits of their social security number. And then he asked them what they would be willing to pay for a wireless keyboard. And what do you think happened? So it's a completely random number, as in the last 2 digits of your social security number. In your case, completely random number, the last 2 digits of your mobile phone. What happens? Well, this is what happens. So on the left-hand column here, these are the last 2 numbers of their social security number. And here is the price, the mean price that they would be willing to pay for a wireless keyboard. So what you see is that you're primed with something completely random. So it'd be interesting for you to look on your tables to see those whose last 2 digits of your mobile phone numbers were higher. Did you write down a higher price than somebody else on your table whose last 2 digits of their mobile phone number was lower? It's not going to work in every case, clearly. Also, it doesn't quite work so well here because we're not all used to trading pounds or using pounds as a currency. So it's easier when our currency is we're used to it. It doesn't work. Well, and some people are laughing. I'm assuming that's because it happened, and you're seeing you did it. So what I wanted to illustrate there was how something as seemingly random as a priming by this random number, nothing to do with it, no realisation. So it might have been the number you were dialing on your telephone before you made the purchase, the number you heard. It's, again, some experiments have been done here, some research has been done here with when you go into a shop and you get given a number to queue. Yeah. So that they say you're in like a bank or something, or a shoe shop where you need to be measured. How it always happens when I take my children in. Have you noticed the numbers, certainly in some places, are always really high numbers? So what they're doing, the theory behind that is that you're priming shoppers before they make a purchase decision with a higher number. So they've tested that one, and again, that's exactly what happens, is when they prime the shoppers with a higher number in the queuing system, their average spend is higher than those that are primed with a lower number. And then onto this one. Now, I don't know whether you noticed when you came in, is it going to come back on? I don't know the music. Yeah, can we just go up a bit higher? So this music was playing when you came in. Now, that was partly to add ambience to the room, but actually there was an ulterior motive behind it, which is priming with other senses. Now, I don't know which of the 2 olive oils you would have chosen, but we primed you with Italian music. And what you find, again, when the experiments are done and you look at consumers overall, that priming, even with something like music that's associated with the origin, leads to a higher frequency purchase of products that are associated with that country. So I don't know how many chose the Italian olive oil versus the Greek olive oil. We tested this one in our office and we had some rather jolly Greek music that we thought might sort of scare everybody when they came in the morning. So we switched it to Italian music for this experiment. But let me just talk you through. So this was so we're replicating here for you to see an experiment that was done actually in Australia with wine. So it's French wine versus German wine, and they did exactly the same thing. They had very comparable SKUs of wine in terms of price point and types of wine. And every day of the week they alternated French music playing in the retailer and German music playing in the retailer. And if a consumer bought either a French bottle of wine or a German bottle of wine, they then were asked some questions when they checked out at the till. And what do you think happened? Well, on the days they played French music, French wine outsold German wine 3-1. On the days they didn't change the SKUs, the pricing, anything. Nothing changed. Alternated every day of the week for 2 weeks. When they played German music, German wine outsold French wine 3-1. This is genuine purchases. This isn't just an experiment. It's actually what people were paying cash for and buying in the store. So they're being influenced again beyond where the conscious is. And 86% of these consumers, or I should say, who were actually making purchases with their own money, specifically said music did not affect their purchase decision. So they were claiming that there was no impact from music on the choices they were making, and yet we've seen the ratios in terms of the sales figures. So what can we learn from all of this? Well, what we can learn is that there are many things outside the rational that impact our brain when we're making decisions. We think, here's an irony, we think, it's around 95% of our decision-making process is subconscious or irrational. So the scientists at the moment and the researchers in neuroscience and neuromarketing are concluding, if you look at all the evidence as we do at the moment, it's around 95% subconscious decision making going on. So that's the stuff that I've just been doing with you in terms of the swapping the chocolate and the priming with price and the various other things, just to sort of highlight how and why those types of things are happening. What we find is that different parts of our brain light up or are more active during decision-making processes. So, for example, if you were given a selection of chocolate and you were asked to choose which chocolate are you going to buy, your conscious brain will be focusing on the rational cues of how much do I want to spend, or I want a bar of chocolate versus individual chocolates, what does my friend like? Whereas if we do fMRI, which is the scanning of the brain, I'm going to come onto that in a little moment, actually the part of your brain that is lighting up when you're choosing between a number of products is the reward centre. So it's not the rational part that's sort of lighting up, it's the how rewarded am I going to be feeling. And that's what's lighting up in your brain. We're also seeking pleasure. This is an experiment that was done with wine, so kind of very relevant to us at Stanford and Caltech universities. And what they did was they gave consumers a bottle of wine was $5, or a lower price and higher price. And they tasted them, and then the respondents had to talk about which one they liked and why, and that's how they were going there. What they also did was they scanned the brains of respondents as they were talking about what they'd done. And what they found was that the part of the brain in which is the pleasure sensor of our brain, we know from the science research, was what was being ignited. So not only did the respondents think it tasted better, perception, or the more expensive wine, but actually they were genuinely getting more pleasure from the more expensive wine. So it wasn't just a perception of, I think it tastes better. Their brain was telling them this is a more pleasurable experience, the expensive wine, subconsciously than the cheaper wine. So what we do know from all of this research is that choice decisions, I'll just read this out, of consumers are not only determined by the rational information, but also driven by forces that are generally outside our control. So here, these researchers over in Canada have been doing a lot of work looking at brands and how we associate with brands. What they've been doing is a series of experiments which are priming positive words, positive images, negative images, and associating them with certain brands. So it's a bit like what we see, when we're getting on the tube to come here, all of the various advertising and everything that we see coming here. And what they're learning is that actually we're building up associations with brands, even though we're not rationally aware of the fact that we've seen any advertising about it. So their evidence suggests that consumers, if you ask for basic recall, can you recall seeing an advert, or they'll say no, but their perception of the brand is changing over time because they're taking in subconsciously the messages that are coming from the advertising or the point of sale material that's in store. So even to the point that if they're priming consumers with positive or negative brand associations for fictitious brands, consumers don't know this happening, the consumers will choose the positively primed brand even if it has negative product attributes. So for example, it's not as good a product, but they'll still choose that because they've been primed with these positive messages. So again, all this is happening in the subconscious part of our brain. So did you know 85 billion nerve cells or neurons in our brains continuously sending messages? It's like this sort of madhouse of all these little messages, neurons creating pathways, breaking pathways, creating pathways. And a lot of it is the unconscious pathways that we're not even aware are happening, are going on in our brains. And that's basically how we form. And our brain, I thought it was quite an interesting one. It's a consolation for me when I think, gosh, 20% of my body's energy is going through my brain. So it's an excuse to eat more chocolate if I'm working hard. But only 2% of our body in terms of body mass. So it's the amount of energy that we're using to have even all these unconscious decisions is enormous in terms of what's going on in our brain. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with all of these types of examples, which is larger. Now, what we're doing here, the one at the back looks larger because of the sense of perspective that we've got. If I were to hold an arrow against them, they're the same size. So what's happening there, and this is why all of these illusions, optical illusions, work, is our brains are forming the missing information. So our brains, our neurons tell us that something that's further away is smaller, because that's what we've learnt. So we're applying that memory, that brain neuron connection to this, which therefore tells us if it looks quite big, it must be bigger because it should be smaller if it's further away. So we've learnt that, and we have a very hard-wired sense of that because that's what our brains have told us. So that's why these optical illusions work, because we've created these pathways, neural pathways, and that's the important bit. So how do we go about testing using what's neuroscience? So it comes from medical science, and it's now moving into what we call cognitive neurology or neuroscience, which is looking at decision making, which is the area at One Intelligence that we use to help inform our research and how consumers think and feel. So there are a number of ways it's done. You're probably familiar, and I showed you a diagram of an fMRI output. So you have these quite scary big machines that are used in medical science for scanning all parts of our body. But in neuroscience, they're used to scan our brains. So you conduct experiments, you can talk to people, the consumers as they're in the fMRI scanning machine. And basically what we do is we measure brain activity, because our brain is like any other organ in our body. So the blood flows through, and it's the more the blood flows through is when that part of the body is being used. And we know from medical science which parts of our brain are about reward, indulgence, fear, pleasure. So we can see which parts of our brains are lighting up at different moments. This is used, and Natasha's going to talk about it in a moment, used quite a lot in advertising research, so that you can start to see which parts of the brain are lighting up. And then you get a sort of output reader as well. So that's the sort of really high-tech end of this type of research, mainly restricted to sort of university and academic type research. Rather scary picture of the lady there, but this is the EEG, which is more typically used primarily because it's less expensive to run. What that does is it measures brain activity, but only the surface brain activity. So it gives us some of the information, but not as much as fMRI, which looks inside the brain, so the bits that are inside, not just on the outside, but does give us an indication of brain activity. And then we have other physiological methods that we can use. So the facial EMG, which is about probes, it looks quite scary, probes on the face, it doesn't hurt, which measure minute changes in facial expressions. So you can measure whether people are smiling or frowning, or and that's quite useful. You can do skin conductor as well, which looks at changes in physiological conditions, and then eye tracking as part of this, where the camera is recording where your eyes are looking on specific products. So all of these methods are ways that we can start to use this science of the brain to help us. So now we're going to look at how to apply this in two different areas, which are brand building and pricing. What can we learn from this body of research to help us in terms of what we do from a brand perspective and from a price perspective? Now, clearly the neuromarketing, or this area of science, can help us in decision making across a load of different areas, advertising and effectiveness and communication. But for today, we're just going to focus on brand building and pricing. So I'm going to hand over to Marina and Natasha, who are going to talk to you about that. And then I'm going to come back at the end and look at how we can apply some of these learnings specifically to the wine category.
Thank you very much, Lily. So hello everybody, my name is Natasha. I work at Wine Intelligence and have done for the past 2 years, focusing primarily on qualitative research and looking at how we can apply those findings a lot to branding. So it's very interesting to take everything that Lily's just presented to you and think about what we can learn about for branding. So I'm now going to just spend the next 10 minutes or so talking to you about some key examples about how neuroscience and neuromarketing techniques have been applied to branding, and some interesting things for you to take away. So there's been lots of different experiments, but we tried to pick the most interesting ones for you. So to start, I want you to have a look at some brands that I've put here. Are you drawn to any of them in particular? Do you recognise any of them? Now, the reason I'm showing you this is one of the first fMRI studies that was applied to branding used car brands and actually insurance brands to see how people were responding to brands in their brains. And the results are that actually our brains respond much better to familiar brands, to brands that we recognise. The study was conducted in North America, and they took a sample of people and showed them weak and strong brands across these categories. And the precise findings were that strong brands not only show that the brain it activates more positive emotions in the brain, so the part of the brain that's associated with positive emotion when you see brands that you recognise. It also lights up the parts of your brain that is associated with reward and self-identification. What's even more interesting is that your brain can process all of that information much quicker and with less effort. And then at the other end of the scale, weaker brands actually light up parts of your brain which are associated with more negative emotions and memory, which is meaning your brain is working harder to try and understand what's going on when you're placing less familiar brands. Now, this is interesting to help us understand what in marketing we talk about a lot, so the double jeopardy of familiar brands. So this has been proven before, and it's something that we talk about in marketing. So the double jeopardy of brands being that bigger brands have a larger base, people know the brands more and are more loyal to the brands. But taking this neuroscience experiment, it's quite interesting to learn why that's occurring. So we have proof that our brains are actually finding familiar brands easier to process. Okay, so that's learning number one, brands are important. Second neuro takeaway, as I've named them here, that I wanted to share with you was about understanding brands as engrams. Okay, this is something that they speak about in neuromarketing a lot, and it's about understanding your brand as a map with, in terms of how your brain would see a brand. Okay, so instead of the more static ways of thinking about brands and marketing, such as pyramids or onions with lots of associated layers, this is looking at the fact that actually, when we think about brands, our brains are making hundreds of different associations at the same time. And it takes a while, as Lily was talking about previously, to make those associations, and they can change the whole time. So it's a much more dynamic way of thinking about your brand, taking into consideration the complexities of our brain. This is interesting in terms of thinking about how we might think about how a brand can connect to other parts of the consumer's life, and understand if we're really leveraging all the associations that sit behind a brand. Think about different ways to target your consumer. Obviously, this throws up some potential problems. So if we think about a brand engram like this as opposed to a brand pyramid, there's lots of different outlying things, and it will vary according to every individual, depending on their experience with the brand. So if we take the 7-Up example here, we've got lots of different ways from more rational associations to more experience-based associations, and those experiences that will vary. But where this is interesting is if you think about how your target consumer is really identifying how their brand engram looks, and then you can try and picture what they've termed in neuromarketing as a herd engram, where we combine individual engrams and see where the key associations are for a brand and where the outliers are. To a certain degree, it's what we do a lot already in focus groups in terms of exploring how brands are perceived, but this is really showing how important it is and how it can be considered. Okay, so the next takeaway I want to show you is the importance of what I call here emotional anchors. So I've shown you 2 examples here. Sambuca and chocolate. Okay. Now, I've chosen these because they're quite personal examples to me. When I see Sambuca, I feel slight rejection because I have bad experiences with Sambuca. It's not something that I like to drink. Chocolate, on the other hand, I associate with reward. It's my treat, and so I have a very warm feeling towards it. These are very extreme examples, and not all brands or categories have the advantage of having such strong pull or rejection, but this gut feeling that we have towards a brand, sometimes we can't always explain. It's not always a rational feeling. It's based on our experience, and understanding these emotional anchors around your brand can be very important, even if it's not as warm or as cool as the reactions that I've just described here or in these 2 examples. It's important in understanding how you're going to approach your target, how open they're going to be to what you're about to present to them, and it will give you a better idea of understanding how much perhaps you need to invest in the actions that you're planning on taking place. Okay, so I'm going to give you another example of the importance of emotional anchoring when it comes to brands, and understanding the emotional anchor might be behind a brand. Pepsi and Coca-Cola. Okay. I'm sure you've all heard about the Pepsi-Coke tests that took place. I think the first one was back in the 70s, where they did a taste test against Pepsi and against Coke, a blind taste test run by Pepsi, I think it was, and Pepsi always came out on top, okay, when it was a blind test, so they weren't shown what the brand was. People said they preferred Pepsi. So more recently, in 2004, a neuroscientist called Reed Montague decided to put this to the test. using fMRI, again, to test people's brains whilst they were testing these products, to see actually if you could understand why people were saying they preferred Pepsi in taste, but actually were still buying Coke more often. Okay? And the results were, well, first of all, actually, he did the taste test, so not the what was going on people's brains, but just gave them blind taste test of Pepsi and Coke. And the same results were found as back in the 70s, that actually people did prefer the taste of Pepsi. And the part of the brain associated with reward was actually 5 times stronger when they tasted Pepsi than it was for Coke. Okay? So he confirmed the test before. Well, then the really interesting part was, then he told them what they were drinking. He said, okay, now you're going to have a sample of Coke, and now you're going to have a sample of Pepsi. And the results completely changed. Almost all respondents seemed to prefer Coke. And what's more interesting is that they didn't just say that, but the part of their brain was actually showing they were preferring Coke more, now that they knew that they were drinking Coke. And also not only did the reward centres light up more, but the thinking and judgment part of the brain was coming into play as well, which just shows the power and the importance of Coke and Pepsi. So I've got a little chart there which shows how, whilst Pepsi is down there, the judgment associated with Coke is much stronger. Now obviously that doesn't answer the question as to why Coke's branding is so powerful, but it does show that it is, and that it's important. So it could be that this is a constant source of debate. It could be marketing campaigns. It could be something simple as a curly font or the bright standout of the red, but that's for another seminar. Okay, so the fourth takeaway that I wanted to share with you was the importance of hardwiring when it comes to brands. So hardwiring, what do I mean by that? Hardwiring is a term that they use in neuromarketing, referring to how the brain makes connections and remembers things. Okay, so hardwiring apparently takes around almost 2 years to make a solid connection in the brain. So there are lots of different neurons and cells that are firing together, but for them to, and they might combine when they're thinking about an experience, but for them to make a solid connection, so that for them to make a solid connection that you will remember, that can take up to 2 years of constant messaging apparently. So they're the kind of connections that will spring to mind when you see a brand you might connect it with something. But that takes time. So that goes some way to explain why there are certain campaigns, for example, certain brands that we associate with certain taglines that have been hardwired into our brains. Those messages that have been said again and again, and then even if they aren't around anymore, once they've been successfully hardwired, we still remember them, which is why, for example, I've given an example of Wolf Bless and the associations with cricket. In the UK and the USA is still an association that consumers that I speak to in focus groups still bring up. Jacob's Creek, for example, which sponsored Friends a few years ago, that again is still a very strong connection in consumers' mind. That was a continuous campaign of Jacob's Creek sponsoring Friends. And again, even very recently, just a month ago, so I think it was now, we did a focus group exercise and got people to group different brands on how they saw it, and actually there was a set of TV brands that people put together because they were used to seeing wine brands in that way. Okay, so having said all of that, the importance of having a consistent message, there's a study that shows that actually we need to make sure that we're being inventive and providing something new at the same time, which is quite a good thing for us as marketers. It'd be quite boring if we did learn that we had to say the same thing again and again and again. And the point of this chart here is to show you where our attention, recall and liking of a brand or a communication campaign reaches its peak, when it's somewhere between familiar and new. Okay, so the point there is you need to get the balance right. Okay, and then just quickly to finish, because I'm running out of time here, the fifth takeaway is how your brand is being processed. You can learn from neuroscience here as well. They talk about us processing things in two ways. So we have high attention processing, where you're really paying attention, like I hope you're really paying attention to me. The type of learning that you might have at school, where people are talking to you, you're making the decision to listen to them, and you're implicitly learning. The other type, which is interesting for us, is low attention processing. This is the kind of processing that's not strictly active or completely conscious. And this is very powerful, that it's been proven to building long-term associations with brands. So that's the thinking behind that, is actually TV is very good at building low attention processing associations versus print. TV, because we're not always aware that we're paying attention, that it's there. But that doesn't just mean that TV is always going to work for you. So just to quickly finish off, I'm going to give you an example of an ad campaign from Heineken done a few years ago called The Weasel. And this experiment here, run by Google, they measured the attention and the attention throughout an ad. And the story is, there's this man, I know you can't see it very well, so I'm going to talk you through it. A man goes into a house party, he brings some beer, he goes into the fridge to put his beer in the fridge, and then sees there's some Heineken there, steals the Heineken instead, refers it to his brand, and then leaves. The consumer engagement with the ad, as the switch of the beer is going over, that's when this line here, which shows consumer engagement with the ad, that peaks at that central point in the ad. You can see the blue line is heightened, and you can't see it very well, but the Heineken is there on the left in the fridge, and this is the unbranded beer that he's brought. But however, in the experiment, they also use eye tracking to see where people were looking at this key point when attention was at its highest, and that's shown by the green spots. So whilst attention was at its highest, actually eye tracking data showed that people were looking at the unbranded beer as opposed to the Heineken, which goes to explain why this ad rated very well in terms of likability, but very poorly in terms of memorability. Great, I need to finish that. I hope you find that interesting. Thank you. I'm going to pass you on to Marina.
Hello everybody, my name is Marina and I'm also part of the Wine Intelligence qualitative team. I have so much interesting to say about pricing, and I'm sure you all want to hear it, but the time is a bit running out. So I'll run through my experiments quite quickly, but I'm very happy to talk about them also later. Because actually a very important thing, one of the key insights of the neuroscience research is that actually buying something causes the pain center in our brain to light up. Actually, researchers in Carnegie Mellon and Stanford University presented subjects with cash, and then they recorded their brain activity with fMRI and offered them items each with price. And what they found is that the cost of the items actually causes the same effect in our brain as actual physical pain. But the negative activation produced by the cost is not it's not same as absolute cost, but it's actually relative, and the context of that transaction is very important. So how can we minimize that pain of paying for our consumers? And I have a few examples to share. The first one is, how many of you have been sitting in a taxi looking at the meter running and feeling a bit nervous as the cost is increasing? And then how many of you have been eating in a sushi restaurant and actually thinking, am I full, depending on the extra price of that red plate that you kind of want to have? And the important neuromarketing insight is that actually selling the products in a way that consumer sees the price increase with every bit of consumption is causing the most pain. And of course not physical pain, but just that activation of the brain areas associated with the pain. And marketers have learned from this insight and actually designed offers to minimize the pain. So we have all-inclusive holidays, we have package deals, and both offer single, relatively attractive price that removes the additional pain from the buying experience. And even though sometimes the actual package deal price is higher than actually the amount the consumers would pay for each individual item, it appeals to many consumers. And priming, if I go back to the social security experiment that Luli was explaining a bit earlier, is the subtle cues that can affect the subsequent behavior. The psychologists have studied the role of money cues, how that affects consumer behavior, and actually money cues, they increase selfish behavior. They actually found out that students that read stories that included money or were shown posters that had money images actually were 70%, it took them 70% longer to ask for help, or they only spent half of the time helping others. And this is actually really useful for advertisers, and that's why high investment returns or prosperous retirement campaigns include a lot of money images, because they appeal to selfish interests of the viewer. But on the other side, if we want to fill viewers with a feeling of warmth and desire to please somebody else, this money images can be really self-defeating. And the opposite example I can give is the advertising campaign that diamonds are forever, whereas the marketers are targeting the luxury gift market, and they are far away from money cues. And actually, a tagline like "special savings in December" on that campaign could ruin the whole effect. And what I'm actually showing on my slide is that research in Cornell Hospitality University showed that a simple currency symbol in front of the price can actually affect the choice for the consumers. They actually displayed they looked at several displays techniques in restaurants, showed the consumers the same menu with numerical with currency sign price, numerical without currency sign, and the spelled out. And actually they found out that consumers spend significantly more if they were shown the number without the currency. Without it. Yeah. And not just money cues, actually also how the numbers are presented is very important. Actually, our brain sees this kind of model, visual, dimensional, and oral. Just to go quickly through the chart on your bottom left is showing that glittering and kind of this high quality price shown the same one would feel more expensive, whereas the discount symbols would make it feel cheaper. The top one, actually, the discounted price, shows that we process numbers more quickly and intuitively if mentally big numbers are depicted larger, and actually mentally small numbers depicted small. And actually, as a result of that study, where they showed wine on discount with either A or B price, the B was increased sales for 28% more than the discount A. And the third one is actually learning from the phenomenal phonetic symbolism. Actually, we all know that the price 722 is objectively lower, but actually the price 766 made, if people bought ice cream, people were more likely to buy the ice cream. And why? This oral model suggests that actually we perceive consonants as small and big, and I or E are perceived a bit smaller, so 66 sounded smaller compared to 22. This example actually relates to anchor effect. Actually it's important the order in which we show prices. actually when we show consumers first the more expensive price, they judge every next price relative to the price that was shown first. So all the others are actually cheaper. And there's two examples took from internet, but probably a really good one was also the introduction of Apple iPhone. When they first released the product, the prices were in the US between $499, $599, and that was kind of the anchor of what that unique product should cost. And then later on, in a few months, they dropped the price for like $200 US, and it boosted the sales. And then when they introduced the iPhone 3G, actually with the price $199 US, they sold 1 million phones in 3 days. And the last one, actually it's important also how many products we show, because our brain when they did a research with fMRI scanning, they found that actually if people had two similar products to choose between, they had quite a problem deciding. And as soon as a similar, lower, less attractive option was given, consumers were keen to go for the middle option, so they would go for the middle chocolate. Whereas on the other hand, a different kind of decoy pricing, we call this, when a higher end product was introduced, even if it sold poorly, so consumers were not very much likely to choose the most expensive chocolate, but they were much more likely to go for the second best option. And to give you a really good example with the wine list, if there's a bottle of £100, the 25 pound bottle will seem much cheaper compared to there's a bottle of £30, whereas the 25 pound bottle will sound much more expensive.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So that's just tip of the iceberg. I'm just going to conclude off with how we can take this. So what we're doing at Wine Intelligence obviously is understanding all of this research, spending a lot of time studying all of this, and then trying to say, well, okay, how do we use it? How do we share this knowledge, the sort of experiments we've been talking about, insights and pricing and branding with our client base? So one of the questions you might be asking yourselves is, if 95% of our decision making is subconscious, what's the point of doing research? Hopefully that's not going through your mind, because that's what we do for our clients. But what it does mean is that we're doing two things at Wine Intelligence. We are making sure that we learn from this so that we can help our clients with their decision making. And we're also adapting our research to make sure that we take account of this. So for example, if we're doing a quantitative survey and questionnaire, doing something like, a brand evaluation, which label do you like, we'll put something, which label do you like for a certain occasion. So we're grounding it in an occasion. So even in our quantitative and qualitative research, what we're able to do is take the learnings from this and use them to make sure that we're doing good research, and that we're understanding that a lot of the decision making is going on subconsciously or irrationally in people's brains, so that when we see the outcome of what consumers do, we can interpret that in a more sophisticated way. So the key takeaways for us are to be all of us, to be conscious of the fact that this is a new body of research. Really, neuromarketing and cognitive neuroscience has been around properly for about 8 to 10 years. We're still learning a lot from it. What we are learning is there's a lot going on in our brains with our 85 billion neurons that are whizzing around in the pathways that we're not conscious of. That a lot of the decision making we are doing is irrational and not based on the rational cues that perhaps we had been drawn to or been basing our decision making on as marketeers and as wine sector people. And that we can learn from this in terms of increasing advertising effectiveness. We can learn from this to increase in terms of spend, in terms of influence. We can learn from this in terms of our brand hierarchy, how we put brands together, and most importantly, we can learn from this in terms of how we position price, both from a retailer or an online retailer perspective, and in terms of the kind of offers and even how we present the offers. the symbols that we use, how those are done, and use that to help us understand how our consumers are making their decisions. So I think almost with 1 minute over time, since we started a couple of minutes late, we want to conclude there. What we will be doing is putting up a summary of this presentation from Monday, will be on our website, so you can download a summary of the kind of headlines of this presentation. You've also got on your desks a little plug for our reports shop where you've got a voucher. So we're very happy to take those vouchers and take orders for those, and get in touch with us, info at Wine Intelligence, or indeed any of the Wine Intelligence team. Give us a shout, give us a call, let us know if you're interested in any of those reports. And I think some of you who are here are joining us at 5 o'clock for the presentation of the Wine Intelligence 10 for 10 Business Awards and drinks, which will be happening at 5 o'clock, where we'll be presenting some of the awards, the global awards for leaders, industry leaders, and that's happening in room 11, which is just down the corridor. So please do come and join us for a drink and see the presentation of the awards at 5 o'clock. Natasha, Marina and I are going to hang around in case there's any specific questions that you've got, and thank you very much.